Hello, hello, and welcome back to Bearing Birth, a birth story podcast highlighting the emotional impact of birth, the immediate postpartum period, and the years beyond. I'm Sophie, a perinatal mental health therapist.
And I'm Jordan, a doula specializing in postpartum support. We have such a wonderful episode today. We're chatting with Libby Mukhi about her 2 births. Libby has 2 daughters, and she brings a unique perspective when discussing birth stories because she is a birth story listener. In addition to helping folks process their birth stories, Libby is also a postpartum doula, and she has a certification in perinatal mental health through Postpartum Support International. A friend of mine who is also a birth worker introduced me to Libby because we both work in the birth story world, and I was really eager to have her on the podcast from the day we first met.
And I'm so glad that you did, because our whole conversation, from hearing her birth stories and then to how she made sense of them, all the way to how she came into the birth story work, and how she uses what she went through to have empathy for others and to help others, was really inspiring and fascinating.
Yeah, it totally was. And it was really interesting to hear how Libby actually experienced her 2 births in 2 different countries, and each culture really seemed to have pros and cons. And I thought that was a really unique perspective.
Yeah, it was super rare to hear that, and I imagine it is rare in and of itself to experience that, and just such an interesting perspective to listen to. It made me really curious about others who have experienced that too. Anyways, while editing this episode, I just remember feeling so many parallels to Libby's story and my own, from her C-sections to struggling with perfectionism and wanting to control aspects of her birth. And while her first birth was quite devastating in a lot of ways, and she ended up feeling pretty let down by aspects of her births, it ultimately propelled her into this type of work as a birth story listener and helping others process their stories. And I imagine this episode will be highly relatable to many of our listeners as well.
I definitely think that will be the case. There's so many themes discussed that are really universal, such as grief, needing to feel nurtured and held, having really high expectations for parenthood, and really wanting to support your children the best you can, even when that feels impossible.
Yeah, I recall part of the conversation too on how difficult it was feeding her baby and how much energy and time and frustration goes into that. And the responsibility of keeping your baby alive and how much of a huge weight that is, especially if it's solely on one person, like in Libby's experience initially, and how that really impacts a person's mental health. I've definitely struggled with that too, the anxiety and the overwhelming responsibility, and I know friends and clients have too.
Yeah, I see the same struggle on a daily basis with my doula clients as well. Keeping a small human alive is not easy,
No.
Which brings us to some content warnings. In this episode, we discuss 2 C-section deliveries, 1 planned and 1 unplanned. We also discuss induction techniques, feelings of abandonment, and struggles with hormone changes and the strong emotions that come with that.
Today's episode will be just part 1 of a 2-part conversation with Libby. Later this week, we'll dive a bit deeper into her work as a birth story processor and listener. And trust me when I say you will definitely want to listen to both of these episodes.
Oh my gosh, I so agree. These episodes are so juicy, and I can't wait to get into them. Libby really provides some great insights and perspectives to birth.
And don't forget to check out the awesome resources discussed in this episode, which we have linked in our description, along with some great freebies. You can also find links to our free resources on our Instagram page.
Please enjoy part 1 with Libby.
A doula and a therapist are sitting down to talk about birth. A doula and a therapist are sitting down to talk about birth.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Libby. We're so excited.
Thank you for having me.
So you're going to share 2 birth stories today, and just some reminders. You can go at your own pace, and anything that you want to share is great for us to hear.
Yeah, whatever feels important is the most important part of your story to us. So we're just excited to hear what stands out to you in your birth stories, or one of your birth stories, whatever feels better.
Yeah. I'll probably go into a bit more detail about the first one, and then just share a bit about the second one and how different it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That'd be a good perspective.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, would you like to start about how your first pregnancy was?
Yeah. So we had just moved to Australia, and I got pregnant maybe 5 months or so after we moved there, and we wanted to have a child. We'd just gotten married. we got pregnant really quickly and easily, which I felt very grateful for, because I know I had a lot of friends who were on, fertility journeys, and, you just never know how it's going to go. And I basically just was fascinated with the process. So I dove very deep into listening to podcasts just like this about people's birth stories, and, watching video of people giving birth. Like, I just wanted to be in that world and understand it. And I think part of that's like the control freak in me, just wanting to understand every detail so that I can potentially control it when the time comes, which you can't, spoiler alert. And so I would walk to work. I worked in brand consulting at the time, and my office was about 3 miles away. So I'd walk there and just like listen to these podcasts. And it was so funny because it was like my own little world. My husband had no idea about any of the stuff I was really thinking about, because it was just like me and my learnings. Pregnancy was really smooth. I think in part because I was able to walk so much and just be very fit and, active. It helped with less pain and stuff. I did like a swimming aqua mums, they called it in Australia.
Oh, that's fun.
And that felt amazing. And I made some really good friends there and stuff. So I was really grateful that the pregnancy was pretty smooth. The whole time I was kind of, visualizing a natural birth and trying to equip myself for that outcome. Now, as we got closer to the due date, we started realizing like you may have to be induced. And that felt like a total loss for me. I really had to grieve. That was one of the most sad moments, because I knew what could happen once you get induced. Like, I understood the, cascade of interventions and all that. So
At what point in your pregnancy was
this? Was like right around my due date, like sort of as I was approaching my due date. My blood pressure was sort of like creeping up every visit. Finally, it got high enough that I didn't have preeclampsia, but they were worried that it was going to start to like move into that territory. And so they finally set an induction date. Went in. It's such a surreal thing, to go in not being in labor. And
it's not what you picture.
No, it was not. And I had to stay that first night by myself in the hospital. They put you in like a shared room. And so my husband took me and dropped me off, and just had to kind of like try to sleep that night.
Could you sleep? What was going through your mind?
No, I tried to rest. It was more this like, I knew I needed to conserve my energy situation, but I was really, really nervous. I have generalized anxiety anyway, so I just was overthinking, and I felt very alone. Like, I also have sort of the abandonment wound that I work with. So it's like, it was not ideal to have to be kind of there by yourself. And so they did, I don't even know if it's the same process in Australia, because at the time I wasn't as immersed in this world. I think it was maybe sort of the equivalent of a Foley bulb. But whatever it was, they administered the, treatment to try to start getting things going. The next morning, nothing has happened. So they did it again. And then they did a third one later, and they would let me go outside. So I would go walk around the hospital, and it was right in the city. So it was like very chaotic and buzzing, like not very conducive to like relaxing into this state you want to be in. But then I started getting really bad cramps, and they felt to me like just really bad period cramps. It wasn't, they always describe the contraction as like starting at the top and rolling down. But for me, this was just very low. Like, it felt like it was as, a period cramp would feel. But they got pretty bad. And so I finally, this was after they'd done 3 rounds, which is the most they could do of this
Induction
treatment. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And so then things did kick into high gear, and I all of a sudden was having contractions, 60-second contractions every minute or 90 seconds apart. It was a lot, and it just kind of kept kept going. And finally, like 8 hours had gone by. I was just squirming. Like I just wanted to crawl out of my skin. It was hard to walk. I was really cold at times and hot. Like my temperature was weird. They had a birthing tub. And I had always envisioned being in the water. But then when I got in the water, I was like really cold and shivering and uncomfortable. I couldn't get comfortable. It was like there was nowhere to go. I ended up spending a lot of time just on the toilet, which I know a lot of people find solace there.
And you had your own space at this point, and you were no longer alone.
Yeah, great clarification. Yes, they moved me to a room. So in Australia, a lot of people are in like shared spaces. Because we weren't citizens, we didn't have like Medicare there. So we had private insurance, and we were in a private hospital for that reason. So they, I'm going to put this in quotation marks. The care is meant to be better, but yeah, I guess what that entailed was having my own space, which was very nice. And it had a view of the city, which was really peaceful to me to look out and see. And I'd made all these like intention kind of mantra cards, like birth affirmations. And so I was just kind of reading those. And at one point I remember one of the midwives there saying like, "You're doing really well with this." And I think I just so deeply needed that. It was one of the few moments anyone encouraged or validated me. And so then, I was in the tub, was just like really struggling, finally asked for an epidural, and they checked me and I was only at a 2. So it's like, after all that, I was just like, oh, I thought I was like, I'm either transitioning right now or nothing's happening. And sure enough, nothing happened. So then they started the Pitocin, and I was able to go to sleep for a bit and woke up and I was at a 6, which was really promising for me. And then things just kind of stalled out. And so by now we're probably, the whole thing was a 2-day process. So from when I went in and started that first night, ended up sort of, there was like, it wasn't even decel, like it was like our blood, heart rate was too high. The baby's too. And there was starting to be like blood in my urine, and they were concerned. So it finally got to a point where they're like, yeah, we need to like go do a C-section. And that it just, I was in this very surreal, panicky, in my head, just like, oh shit, okay, here we go. And it was so fast, you almost don't have time to think about it. And I hadn't really eaten and I hadn't slept well. And it was just, you're just kind of not in your body at that point, or at least I wasn't. And so whisked me into the operating room. There was one person who was my anesthesiologist, and he was really like the saving grace for me. He stood there at the top of my head and really explained what was going on. And he had this calm, compassionate voice, and he offered to take pictures for me. And he got the most incredible photo of like my daughter coming out with the light shining
Probably
on her
does
head.
it a lot.
I know, totally.
The angles.
It was like, who knew that he would be the one who would kind of salvage this experience for me. And I think the photos actually really were what did it, because it's like, it can help you fill in the hole from point A to point B. Like you can see it better, right? It just something that does feel very out of your control. And then where there's like a sheet in front of you and you can't see what's going on. At least back then, this was about almost 7 years ago. So I think C-sections are getting a lot more friendly in terms of bringing the parent and the birthing person into the process, and like literally pulling back that cloak. But at the time I couldn't really see what's going on. So it just really helped me to have like documentation and to be able to see that.
Yeah, it's a huge moment. And your body's going through so much, and you literally have nothing to connect the memory to other than the sensation and like the emotions and things like that. It makes sense.
And even the like, I don't know, it's just because you almost can't even, the sensation is like there, but it's like this pulling weird because you're numb. It's just,
It's not something that's in your control.
Right. It's easy to feel very detached from it, I think, because of the way they design it, right? And so, yeah, then we went, you know, I had to spend about an hour in the recovery room by myself. So they took Kaya is her name. They took the baby, and my husband Rishi had her with him, and I was just in this room and again felt very abandoned because I was by myself and I was like, hello, I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. I was like at the mercy of whoever was going to come check on me. Finally, I got to go back up to where our, you know, recovery room was going to be and be with my family. And, it was just, the whole thing was not great. And then it kind of proceeded. So there in Australia, they keep you for 5 nights if you had a C-section. So I'd already been there for 2 nights. And so it's like, okay, now we're here.
Did you know
5
that
nights.
you were supposed to stay there for 5 nights after, or was that something you learned in the moment?
I don't remember. I don't even remember it. To be honest, the whole thing was like, I feel like I went into a pretty dark place. Day 2, when like your milk often comes in, the best way I could describe it is I felt like I went to war with my hormones. Like I went into this deep dark, it was dark in the room. The midwives all wore like these little, reminded me of like old flight attendant uniforms, like kind of these like long black skirts and these little practical shoes. And it was like, they felt like they were of a different era. And so it kind of played into this feeling like I was in a movie or something. Mm-hmm. Like it just didn't feel like normal real life at all.
Well, you were under a lot of drugs too, still, like to recover. And sometimes, like for me, I was like hallucinating did you feel like sounds and smells were really intense?
I didn't have that. It was more just like this insane rupture of emotions. Like I was like wailing, you know, just sobbing, these like huge heaving sobs. And then I would get very panicky and kind of claustrophobic, kind of feeling tethered to the bed and the room. And so there was this little courtyard pretty close, like across the hall from where my room was. And so I'd go out there, and I remember it was raining at one point, and I was just like standing in the rain, sobbing. And then it's just like everyone just kind of like walks right on by, you know, nobody really checked in. And it's like in that moment, you kind of just need a hug or be like, are you okay? I know this is so hard. Like
be with you.
Something. And my husband was in there with our baby and didn't really know what to do. Like he just kind of did the best he could, but it's hard to know how to respond, you know, in something you've never done before. Yeah. That's that intense.
It must really add to the loneliness theme.
It did for
Fighting
me.
Fighting this battle, like internally.
Yes. Exactly. I felt very much like, oh my God. And just couldn't, with the whole thing, I was so tired, but I couldn't sleep. And my blood pressure was pretty high after,
which makes magnesium sense.
I wasn't, but I think just the pain meds in general, I'm like so sensitive to medication. And so kind of coming down off of all of those, my legs got really swollen from all the fluids. And that was actually one of the worst parts. It made me feel so panicky. And I have this theory, this is just totally like anecdotal, but that when you're that swollen, because it impedes your circulation, it almost just gives you this, it like boosts your anxiety. Cause I definitely felt it's just like, oh my God, please just massage my legs. Like I need this fluid to go away. Mm-hmm. And yeah, long story short, we finally got out of there. There was one day, you know, I'd get up and walk around. The nurses, the midwives, really, they're all midwives there. They were lovely. And you kind of had this whole rotating cast. And I did feel very supported by them. It's like a strange tension where you can feel completely abandoned and alone and also supported. Like the duality is kind of, you know, strong.
Did you ever feel like you had to be on your best behavior as a patient in order to get better treatment? whoever was on the shift.
Yeah. And I think part of that actually, I don't even know if it was to get better treatment or just as this like star student persona that we are taught and develop that narrative of like, I have to be the best and listen and get the A plus. And that it's that performance narrative too, that can be so jarring when like you're used to being able to study and pass the test and get the A. And with birth, like I did so much studying. I studied for 9 months and I did all the prep, and then I did not in my mind pass the test because I did not get the outcome that I wanted, even remotely. Right. And so I just think everyone will have different, experiences and different things, different kind of narratives they're up against. But like for me, the control was a huge one. And it just was the beginning of a very long process of starting to realize we actually have never had control. Really, we're never going to have control, really. Like, it's just this sort of surrendering to the universe and the process in your life is quite a lesson, that takes many years, I think. Probably a lifetime, actually. But
and it wasn't until this birth event that really, like, your body really internalized that or understood that you can't control everything.
Yeah. For me, it was I think of it very much as it was my moment of transformation, right? I was like, where I sort of start to go into my chrysalis and I'm changing form and it's dark and trapped and yucky. And then, over time you start to emerge and you are a different person, you're the same, but you're also very different and your perspective's different. And yeah, it was that very much felt like, I'm still transforming. I think we probably all are every day, but it was a real kind of a calling for me, like this, like, I think when you read about, heroes' journeys and stuff, there's always that like initiation point or that calling. And I think birth can be that for so many people. You go into this dark place, all this stuff is stripped from you and you just kind of have to go through it, and, so anyway, got out of the hospital 5 days later and this is so dramatic, but I was like in the car, like hobbling. I had it was really, I don't think the C-section was done very well because I could just hardly even walk. I was so sore. And then, a little snippet of the second one, but my OB the second time was like, I don't know why they made the scar so big. Like it was just kind of, she was like, I don't know that this was the best C-section scar I've ever seen, but
that doesn't feel good.
Yeah. But we kind of like hobbled through the car and I got in there and rolled the windows down and it was daylight and I was in the fresh air and I felt like Andy Dufresne from Shawshank Redemption. Like,
yeah,
when he
breaking out of prison.
Totally like emerging from a bunch of shit. Like,
well, especially after that many days.
Totally. It was, and at one point before we left, I did have a shower, which was just life-changing. And just felt, that was a really important moment of just that first shower where I was able to like literally rinse away some of what I'd just been through.
Yeah, like wash it off.
But yeah, that was kind of, it was a lot. And it kind of, I think I quickly shifted from being like extremely disappointed and feeling all the loss to kind of shifting into trying to figure out how to parent a highly sensitive person, this baby who I like after the fact learned people call them like high need babies or HSPs, but she wouldn't be sat down. She wouldn't sleep. She just needed to be held all the time or she would just scream. Like she was just a super intense little baby. In Australia, this is kind of interesting. I think they place you into a mother's group. I would probably call it a parents group if it were up to me. But so I was in this group with 15 other women who'd all had babies within a few weeks of mine. And then we'd meet weekly for 6 weeks and have different topics. Maybe we talk about baby massage or baby-led weaning. And
Did you bring your baby?
Yeah, you bring your baby and you just like, it was like an hour and a half. And then we all became friends and then we'd go walk together and get coffees. And it was the greatest gift to have a community like at my fingertips that was brought to me. I didn't have to go seek it. Like that to me was like, oh my gosh, this is how it's meant to be. I never actually felt lonely in the postpartum experience. But the curse of it all was then seeing how my baby was in relation to these 14 other babies or 15 other babies, and seeing them all like sleep in their strollers and just be chill. And mine was like, I'd have to be like shushing and bouncing and sweating, just like it was horror. So I kept feeling like I had done something wrong or like wasn't getting it right, because why was she always so unhappy while these other babies were so content?
Had you had experience with babies and kids before you had your own?
No, minimal. I like babysat the neighborhood kids and stuff, but they certainly weren't babies. But I'm quite a nurturing person. I kind of fit into that like caregiver archetype, but that doesn't matter if you don't actually know what's like normal baby things and what's not.
And it's like the pressure of now being in charge of making this little person okay, that obviously takes away from the time you need to sort of like process what you need to process, especially in terms of, the problems you had with feeling like you failed. And then not only that, like, this person you're trying to protect, you sort of feel like you're failing or doing something wrong. So it just seems like it would just add to the problem and not give you space to process any of it.
Totally. Yeah.
That's hard.
It's great. Yeah. I mean, it's not great. That's a great observation. Like that's exactly what it was. And just being so sleep deprived. I realized now I was kind of in this like manic, I don't know, just really like couldn't even sleep during the day. So I would basically, the next best thing for me was just walking and being in the fresh air. So I would go get a coffee and a chocolate croissant at this little incredible bakery down the street from us. And I would just put her in the carrier and put my backpack on, and we would go walk for like hours and just go be outside. And she wouldn't cry when we were walking. And I could just like listen to, music or podcasts and kind of cope in that way. But yeah, it's like you get more and more. I always use the analogy now. I felt like there's this, metaphorical ladder, and at the bottom of the ladder, you're very regulated and you're like sleeping well and you're calm. And then at the top of the ladder, you are just like losing your mind, panic attacks, totally dysregulated. And so the higher you get up the ladder, like you have to come all the way back down that ladder. And I was just way up high on the ladder for quite a long time. And I think another very important theme of this is just, I didn't know how to ask for or receive help. And so I really was like raised to be like hyper independent, such a theme of America, and we fend for ourselves and we've got to like do it all ourselves. And I was really plagued by that belief system because
that's all you knew.
I was all by myself. Like my husband worked a lot and he was in a pretty demanding role. So he was gone. He wouldn't come home till like 7 a lot of nights. And I just was with this baby all day who I felt like hated her life, I
think that's such a huge problem.
It's
obviously one of the reasons we want to have people tell their stories is just everybody believes that they just have to figure everything out themselves, and it's just not true.
Yeah, it's not true at all.
Were you able to share your birth story with the community that you found, or did you exchange? You said it was like the saving grace for you at that time. Was it because you were talking about how hard it was and what you had just gone through?
Yeah. The woman who facilitated it was incredible. And she was just this very like motherly, nurturing person with several kids of her own. And she very much was our little like tour guide of, early parenthood. And she just did a great job of facilitating very real, deep conversation. And I remember at one point we went around in circle and just everyone was crying. And it was really beautiful just to share in that and to have other people who would pick up the phone or be able to meet you there. They also, another very big, there's all these intersections, right, of what I have determined like can aid in having a kind of a better, more positive birth experience. There, people also take a year off of work, right? And so all these people all had, at least 6 months, but usually most of them closer to 9 months or a year that they were taking off. So it wasn't like you only got the couple months with the people, and then you go right back into your very busy, driven, chaotic lives. We had the time to like go to the coffee shop when their kids were 6 months old, or go to little, the parks or whatever. And so that connection was able to like deepen over time too.
And you attribute that to just being in a different country?
I attribute it. I attribute it to a few things. I attribute it, one, to the way Australia structures these mothers groups. It's a nationwide like initiative they do. It's all just done for you. You're placed in it. You don't have to go, but it's right there for you. Most people do. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like a lot of the legwork, like they come to your house right after you've had the baby to do a weight check and make sure you don't have questions. And it's just, I feel like there's a lot more of them meeting people where they're at. They would do huge like immunization clinics, where you could go like book a time and just go at some point during the day and get your baby shot for free. And it took 5 minutes. And it's things like that cut down on the legwork for parents when they're so tired. And it's like the last thing you want to do is have to get your baby up and ready, and you don't have the bandwidth to research all this stuff and figure out if your insurance works or not, and just all of it. So they did such a better job like meeting people where they were at.
Yeah, and they like have a value, a collective value and knowledge that works and helps. I wish we had that here too.
Yeah, it was pretty enlightening for me to see one way that it could be done. And then we kind of, we came back here when I was 6 months pregnant with my second daughter. So we moved back.
Well, moving when you're pregnant and you have like a 1.5
She was almost 2, yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How was that?
It was insane. We had our dog also, which was another coming and going from Australia with the dog is like, she also really like a smushy face. She was a little pug. And so a lot of airlines like won't fly with them because they're such a risk. So the whole thing was like this humongous puzzle of just like, oh,
wow.
One of our friends was like, if you look at the WHO's list of like major life stressors, you guys are basically doing like all of them at once. Mm-hmm. It was just like new job and move and buying a house and, having young children and all the things. And even the decision of whether we were going to come back was a really hard one to make because we really loved it there. But I think because I'd had such a hard time with Kaya, I was really nervous to go back through that process again. And life, like day-to-day life was just hard. We lived on a 3rd floor walk up. We only had one car, so my husband needed it to get to work. So I would like walk to the store with the kid, like with my baby strapped on and like carrying groceries for 15 minutes up all the, it's just like physically taxing to kind of live day to day, which I loved it until having a young baby. And then it got really hard. So yeah, it was like, do we stay here and like get another different place to live? We would have had to go through the permanent residency process at that point because our visa was almost up. So we decided to come back. So that alone was really stressful, just trying to have to make that decision. And then when we did, it all just happened so fast. So yeah, we got back, bought a house literally the next day we arrived in the US. We'd done all this scouting, went and toured the next morning, put the offer in. Like a month later, got the keys, got moved in.
How did you do that? You got off the plane
That's
and
impressive.
the next day you bought a house?
It was insane. Yes, it was insane. I come from like a project management background, so I went into like full on project management mode.
That's what you could control.
That was me being like, I'm good at this part. I'm good. But it wasn't great. I mean, I was just this like shell of myself. I remember talking to a friend who lived in Austria and he was like, we were FaceTiming. He's like, oh my God, you look tired. And I was just like, first off, fuck off.
Yeah.
Second, yes, I am extremely tired. Like, But yeah, we
Say something else.
yeah, we got there though. So with Malia, who's now going to be 5 soon, she I really loved my OB here. Got in with them quickly. That's another thing, right? You're having to kind of switch care 2/3 of the way through this journey. I was so grateful. She was a really lovely OB. She's very compassionate, patient centered. She was super supportive of me having a VBAC. So that was the goal. I was going to try for a VBAC, but I also did not want to put myself through what I went through the first time around. And so we agreed that if I happened to go into spontaneous labor and happen to progress on my own, we would totally go for that. But if not, we would have a C-section planned. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we did. And the second time around, I was kind of like, oh, it's a little different. I started kind of losing my mucus plug when I didn't have that experience the first time. And things started to seem like they might be moving toward getting there on their own. But, it never really did. By the time the date came around for the C-section, I still hadn't gone into full labor or anything. So I went in, that was very, very strange. Driving to the hospital. Of course, then when you have a second child, you have to figure out who's going to watch your first child and what about your dog and what about all the things. And so in one way, it was kind of relieving to have this planned C-section because I could then make sure my daughter was cared for and that we had a plan in place and it wasn't super stressful in that regard.
It's the most control you can have. It's happening at this time. Yep. The baby will be out then. I'll be, yeah.
Yep.
It must feel so different.
Well, yes, it felt great for the control freak in me. She was like, woo, this is nice. But I was driving, my husband was driving me in. It was early. It was 7 a.m. or something. So it was still dark outside and just driving and just sobbing in the car on the way. Not because I was sad, just because it's so overwhelming being oh my gosh, we're going to go have this baby right now. This is wild. We got in there and, the first time around, it was chaotic. I was totally sleep deprived and hungry and not starting from a great place. Whereas the second time, I was, about as well rested as you can be for being 9 months pregnant. And I just had better reserves to work from. But also the energy was so different. It was very peaceful. I think they put music on. It was other than the really bright lights, that was weird. They did the spinal tap. And I remember all of a sudden feeling my legs go numb. And then with the light shining above me, I was like, you guys, I feel like I am in an alien autopsy. I feel did you ever watch Fire in the Sky? I feel like you guys are about to insert a chip or something. And then we laughed. It was all it was pretty lighthearted. It was actually very weird and kind of alien feeling. Just the being so coherent for all of that.
Yeah. And you're having this small talk, humor, and you're about to be cut open.
Totally.
And your baby's going to be taken out.
But I will say my OB, I'll just call her name out right here because she's so good. Dr. Emily Rangel. She's amazing here in Portland. But she would hold my hand and she'd tell me, okay, now you're going to feel this. And she would just explain what was going on as she was going through it. And that seems so common sense, but it's not. Everyone does not do that. Mm-hmm. And it's a simple thing for anyone listening. It's a simple thing you can do. It's just helping the person, your patient, understand what's going on at any given moment.
Yeah, of course. I was actually going to ask a question regarding that. For your first pregnancy, it sort of seems like the couple of times that the caregiver did something very small and simple for you, but checking in with you. And I was going to ask if you thought that, in those 5 days where you were still in the hospital, when you were really struggling, if something that would have made a difference was if someone was really coming up to you and being like, hey, you did a good job. Of course things didn't go the way you wanted, but this was a good job. How are you doing? Do you think something like that would have made a big difference? And
100%.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It sort of seems like that's what you found in your second pregnancy, which we've talked about before, your team and the people that you trust being around you makes a world of difference. And it seems like that you got that in your second pregnancy.
It was much better. And yes, so spot on. Like I just really craved having like my aunt or someone who's like a very nurturing woman in the room, ideally like a slightly older woman. Like I just like craved that type of energy and presence, because I just felt like I so needed to be held and like cared for. And I am always the one who's holding and caring for others. And so sometimes when you're that kind of caregiver personality, you don't always get it back. And I think would have made a huge difference. Yeah. To have just a little more, nurturing coming towards me. But my OB the second time she was so much better at that. And it really did make a difference. The weird thing was like, so the first C-section was probably done in about 7 minutes. I mean, it was very quick. The second one took like an hour. And so that was something nobody really told me, that it was going to be a lot longer of a process because they were able to take their time and, and so that was a little rough because like once they got her out and they let me do chest, skin to skin, and I didn't have to be taken. They didn't take her away from me or anything. That was just all felt better. But yeah, I was kind of like, oh my God, we're still going here. Like, it's just, you kind of want it to be over. And I was like, why is this taking so long? And so that was just kind of a very notable difference that was a little challenging. Like, I do wish someone had said like, okay, this is going to be about an hour procedure, like just explaining a little bit more about it. I think people just assume since you've been through it before, you already know what to expect, but it's not the same when it's an emergency versus a planned. The positive from that is that when they're able to take their time and stuff, the healing process was remarkably better the second time. So I could get up and move around better. I wasn't going into major surgery after 2 days of not sleeping well and stuff. This was like just a better circumstance.
At what point did they tell you about how they didn't do a good job the first time? Was it during the surgery?
No, it was later because as I was recovering, I was talking to Dr. Rangel and I was like, this is such a little scar stuff. She's like, yeah, I don't really know why the first one, why they went so big with it. Like it wasn't, she kind of just, no, she never mentioned it during, but let's see, the second, it was also different because here they kind of like whisk you in and out of the hospital. And on one hand, I was like, I kind of want to be here a little longer because I was back. Same thing with my anxiety, same thing, feeling claustrophobic and tethered, but I kind of knew what to expect. I wasn't surprised by it this time. So all of that, like me feeling at war with my hormones and stuff, the volume was turned way down. It was not nearly as intense the second time. It was still there. I still kind of was very emotional and weepy and have these like kind of panic attacks in the middle of the night where I'd have to kind of pace around but your body's sore, so you kind of can't pace very well. But I'd go outside a lot. Like I just needed fresh air. But it was all just like a much quicker, like I moved through those milestones a lot quicker. And I think because I was able to kind of have the, wherewithal to be like, okay, a week ago, I was just having surgery and I'm already feeling this much better. I could like see more clearly where I was at in the process and recognize like how miraculous our bodies are at healing. And, so
that makes sense.
It was better the second time. Even though I still felt the loss of knowing I wasn't going to have a vaginal birth ever. Cause we knew we only wanted 2 kids. So I asked if they could just do a tubal, like tie my tubes while they were in there. Like, might as well. While you're at it, can you just make sure I don't get pregnant again? And so but like, that was a relief, but because I was like, oh yeah, I don't have to be on hormones anymore or anything. But then I also, knowing that there's some finality to that and just being like, okay, I guess I'm not going to experience that. And that's sad.
Yeah. It's a whole other thing to process while you're already in postpartum with 2 kids.
Right. And you kind of, I feel myself doing the like toxic positivity thing to myself of like, well, you were able to carry your own baby and you're able to do like, just trying to like
minimize your pain
That's
and the
right.
loss.
Yeah. When really it was very sad to have like spent so much time thinking about and kind of fantasizing about this experience and then never really getting to see it.
Yeah.
And knowing that you won't.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of people talk about their second births and pregnancies as having a redemptive quality. And I'm curious if you felt that way, that, having your baby placed on your chest, or a lot more things in your control, if you felt like you healed certain wounds that were really painful and still open, if it made it feel different.
Yeah, I think definitely there were some key moments that felt redemptive. And I think because they link to like deeper stories of my own, like kind of limiting beliefs and all that I was dealing with, which was stepping up to like advocate for myself. And really, like, I remember this one moment where the nurse came in. This was the second birth, and the nurse came in, and I was like, I'm not doing well. I'm feeling very anxious and very panicky, and I feel very tethered and trapped to this bed. So I really need to figure out if there's a way I can go outside for a little bit. Are you able to get me a wheelchair and like help me go get some fresh air? And she totally did it. And like, I really had to kind of remind myself, like, these people don't know what you need. They don't know. You have to, like, they cannot read your mind. You have to ask. And now if you ask for something and they just dismiss you, that's a whole different thing. But like, you have to ask for what you need. And it's such an important like moment and theme for life, right? Like, I think we, especially as like women, and just when you are someone who's like a caregiver, or just this very like giving archetype, like, it's so easy to not give yourself what you need. And
You have to actually exercise the muscle.
totally.
There's
And
so much power in that.
yeah, and I felt powerful, and I felt really proud of myself to ask for what I need and have her really listen, and me to clearly say, like, I am not doing well right now. I know why, but like, I need some help. And she was just really, she received that and gave me back what I needed and really heard me. And I felt that was very healing. And then, yeah, just having the experience with Malia being there with me, and like having her just like sleep in her little bassinet thing there at the hospital. Like, Kaya never did that. She would just cry until you held her. And with Malia, you could just like swaddle her up and she'd sleep. And I was like, oh my God, she's doing it. It's like, this is what a baby's supposed to do. I put that in quotes too, because it's not real, but like, it felt more normal. And then, funny enough, the biggest, most challenging thing with that was actually Kaya's response to having a sister. She came in to meet her mama Malia, and she started screaming and crying. She was so pissed off.
Oh my God.
And so jealous. And like, it was loud. She's just an intense person. So it was loud. And the nurses would like peek their heads and like, what? Is everyone okay? And then that just, it felt like I was having to try to figure out how to like show up for her and care for her when she was so mad. And then I felt like that took away from me being able to be there and cuddle and bond with Malia the way I wanted to. And so that it shifted into a whole different, like, the sibling dynamics and the relationships, the different ways that my husband related to me, who related to Kaya, who related to Malia, who, and just the way we were all trying to figure out our place in this new
family of four.
Yeah, you were like thrown in the deep end as a family of four.
And I just did not expect it to be quite so intense. Kaya would have, it took about 2 months. She would have these like epic meltdowns where it truly would like flail around on the ground screaming for like 2.5 hours at times. Like, I asked the doctor, I was like, I think I need to see someone, like a behavioral therapist for her. She's like, well, if it goes longer than 2 months, yes, but this is actually normal. She's just having an exaggerated, more than a lot of kids, but that's kind of who she is, And finally, the way I kind of shifted that energy, eventually I just started crying with her, and I was like sobbing. I was like, I know you didn't ask for this. You didn't ask to be a sister. I know this is hard, and I miss you too. And just really like like being transparent with how hard it was. And I'll just never forget that moment where we were both crying. She just finally came to me because she was so mad. She wouldn't even like let me pick her up or anything. And then she finally came back to me and that was one of those moments I'll just never forget. But there are all these, again, like we spend so much time focusing on the birth. And then you just don't think about postpartum at all. And that was one of those like kind of shockers that I just wasn't prepared for that element that actually ended up being one of the hardest parts for me.
Mm. Did you have, did you imagine moments of your children meeting each other for the first time that were much different?
Oh, yeah. Oh, like I read somewhere, get them a little presents to give each other. So I bought like these little stuffies to like, they could each give each other.
So you did your homework for this also?
Of course I did, I guess. Yeah. But I just had no idea it could go so far sideways. So yeah, I guess I did prepare it. But then it was like, I don't give a shit about Peppa Pig. Like, get that thing out of my face. I'm mad, And so I really just, wasn't equipped for the emotional charge behind it all.
Yeah. There's this parallel between like what your daughter Kaya needed from you that you needed from the people manipulating your body and caring for you. Just like, this is hard. Like you're really going through it. I'm with you in it. That can, just make that shift. And it seems so basic, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said, it's common sense just to ask, hey, is this okay that I do that? I'm curious if with Kaya, I know she's a toddler and like, she doesn't really have the language to express her emotions. Was there any prep work that you did of, we're having another baby? And she had so many transitions going on too, moving and being in a new house and flying. That's just so much to juggle. Totally. A lot of questions.
No, I'm tracking though. We did do a lot of prep. We talked a lot. We're very just like try to be very open with her. And I always just assume that babies and small children actually just know everything and are like these very intelligent, wise beings. Whereas I think so many people look at them as like little blobs. But I kind of have a different take on that. And so we just talked a lot about it. We'd read books and she understood theoretically what was going on in my body and that she was going to have a sister, but no one can, it's hard to explain jealousy, or envy to a rage to a, 2-year-old.
The emotion is just so primal. It's right there at face value.
And the word I would use a lot was carnal with her. She looked like almost like at times like a little animal in the woods, just like scared and like screaming and crying. And all I could do was hold her and just tell her it's okay, but then there are days you're so tired. You're like, just stop, please. Like, just stop screaming. Yeah. And so, it's hard when you know how you'd like to show up, but then you don't have the bandwidth, the capacity to be able to do that because you yourself are so exhausted. It's like, it's a tough place to be.
Yeah. You have all these ideas of how you're going to show up as the parent that you want to be and what you want to do differently than maybe how you were parented. And then like all those factors that you don't know about, like being sleep deprived and all the dynamics between your partner and you and the 2 kids and the dog, everything. It's just too much, right?
It's a lot. Yeah, it can be.
And then go back to work.
Yeah.
Well, right. And then being back in the US, that was another component I was like, okay, I can't take as much time off here. Like I need to figure out how I'm going to get myself back into the workforce because we just moved back and I had been, I was freelancing. I'd been working, in this job and then was able to position myself in more of a freelance capacity with my same company, just in a different function. And that was a dream. Like I felt like I had somehow unlocked this amazing opportunity of only working 3 days a week. And it was just like exactly what I'd wanted. And then we moved, I had to give that up. And I was like, I don't know that I'm going to be able to find this again. Like that's that felt like a very unique situation. And I kind of did find it again, but had to like make an LLC and do all the like business stuff as I'm so tired and just muddling through like government stuff. It's just, again, our country just does not make things easy. And so this is a key. I kind of like going on a little bit of a tangent here, but whereas I talked about how I had this great sense of community in Australia and I never felt like really isolated or lonely after I had the baby, I didn't actually have great support. Like all of those people had new babies themselves. So I certainly wasn't going to call them and ask them to come over and help me when I knew they were dealing with the same stuff. Even if I had been better at like asking for help at the time, I just wouldn't have in that case.
It was more like commiserating together. Like, there's other people going through that, but they're not going to be the ones to come and help and support.
And I just really didn't have anyone. Like no one's bringing us meals or, and so then when we came back here, it was actually this like inverse experience where even though I'm from Portland, I have like a very strong network of close friends. My mom is here. Everyone here is working, right? Like all the time. And so I didn't have a community. I'd never been a parent in Portland, so I didn't know what parks to go to or how to do it. I didn't know how to be a parent here. And I didn't have anyone to like spend my days with. And so I actually felt a lot more lonely here because it's almost like you're expecting to come back to this strong sense of community, but you forget we all have to work our asses off here all the time. Mm-hmm. And so there's no room for community or connection. But I did have support. So I had people bringing food and like, would they come meet the baby or hold her so I could have a shower real quick? And so what I've kind of since determined is I think ideally you really need both. Like you need community and you need support. And
wow, right?
Yeah, I love that distinction between the two because I feel like people just lump it together.
Yeah, it's kind of my like framework for how I operate now when I support other people. It's like you one is better than nothing, but you actually kind of need to make sure you're like fulfilling both of those buckets. So yeah, it's just quite an interesting juxtaposition of sort of this experiencing firsthand the strengths that somewhere like Australia provides new families versus America. But yeah,
it's so interesting to have that perspective, but probably so hard.
Yeah, it was just, there were times when I really wish we hadn't left. And then other times I was really glad to be here. Like, it was, again, those same dualities that become another, it's like between the control and like black and white thinking. And, there was a lot to learn for me of how to hold the duality of your experience. And just recognizing I had the capacity for that all at once, this kind of took me some time. I'm still having to practice.
Yeah.
I want to rewind a little bit. Well, it's also like really interesting that you don't hear a lot the perspective of giving birth in two different countries and all of the knowledge that you've gained from that. But I want to go back to what, like for listeners who might also have that control or perfectionist tendencies, what do you think impacted you to have those tendencies?
Like, where did they stem from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, almost certainly from having my mother, who was a workaholic, perfectionist, control freak, right? So I think it can be so generational. And just living within the systems that teach you that your self-worth is tied to your outcomes and your performance and your tests, your grades and all of these. They're like deep stories that are formed when we're little children. And so I think it's like, I would know those things about myself. I'd be like, oh yes, I'm just sort of this like perfectionist, almost thinking perfectionism was like an okay thing, like, oh yeah, people.
Well, on the outside, it's like really functional.
Yeah,
and
you're rewarded for it.
Yeah, it makes me very good at my job and look at me. But like, then you start to like untangle the knot and then you can just start to see more really understanding like, oh, or maybe not even a knot. It's like following the root system, like getting down into the roots and starting to see where that stuff originates from and how to like start to pull up like one root piece at a time.
And how can you even go about doing that? Can you ever fully shake off how you've been socialized and all the stories that you internalize and operate from?
That's such a huge question.
Well, we have a birth story processor here, so that's
it's a really good segue, because what actually for me taught me more than anything, I did start therapy finally after a decade plus of wanting to do it and never having really done it. Finally took that step. Again, another moment when, you know, the US just doesn't really make mental health care. They don't meet you where you're at. Like you got to go push.
Oh, yeah.
And so I finally like got connected to someone who has been helpful in that regard. But I took so in a nutshell, this whole experience planted like a very deep, powerful seed for me that I didn't know was there. Then when the pandemic hit, I was freelancing and I lost my contract in March of 2020 with all the other millions. And I learned that statistic about that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die giving birth than white women. And it made me like irate. Like I was just so lit up by that in a bad way. Like I was just furious. And I had this free time. I was like home with my kids. We were just in that pandemic, that another transformative mode, right? Where we're all trapped in our cocoons, transitioning into God only knows what.
Yeah.
And so I was, I ended up becoming a postpartum doula. Like I just don't even know. I just sort of started researching it and I did it. And I followed that energy right on into my certification. And next thing you know, I was like, had built this business and was doing this work. And as I was doing the postpartum doula work, I started quickly realizing that what I loved the most about it was the like intense, emotional, raw side of things. So like once I got families to a good place, I kind of got a little bored. It's like, I wanted to move on to the next, like horribly tormented family that was in a really bad place so I could like help get them out of it.
What do you think that was that motivating you? Was it like trying to get in contact as close as you can with what you were experiencing and helping yourself retroactively by helping other people somehow?
I think it is that, you know, there's that theory that like your worst moments are also your best moments, or like your sort of lowest point also becomes your most powerful point, sort of a scenario. And so I think that's part of it. I think part of it is my need as this like Pisces who needs like the deepest human connection possible. Like, I think part of it is that like, I just don't love small talk and I'd really prefer to get like way down into the heart of the matter, like immediately. And so it offered me this place. I just think I thrive in that too. Like I can show up for people who are experiencing like intense life change or trauma in a way that is helpful, that is very compassionate and can give them those things that I didn't receive.
It's like the nurturing that you talked about being good at. And I feel like when you experience something where you're just like, I did not have enough support, it's a pretty common story for postpartum doulas to like choose that path after going through something like that and realizing, wow, there's a huge lack of support here.
Totally. Yeah, that was it. I just felt like, okay, I need to at least like try to be a part of the solution here. And so as I'm kind of like navigating this new path and doing this work, I got really interested. I was taking a bath one night and, I was kind of having one of these moments as we do when we're like, wait, what are we doing? Where am I going? What I need. So I kind of like just put that out there of like, what do I need to know? What should I be focusing on right now? And just in huge letters, the word heal came forward for me. And so I just sat with that for a while. And then a few other things came. I'd met with an astrologer who was explaining to me about my birth chart and that one of the most prominent aspects was Chiron, and it was basically saying that I'm like a healer, like meant to, like the healing process and journey is a very big part of like who I am in this life. And it's very interesting to me. And so I ended up kind of going into this rabbit hole and just signing up for this birth story medicine, which is a school put together by Pam England, who wrote Birthing from Within. And she's been kind of a birth guru for a long, long time. Signed up for this course to become a birth story listener and just learn more about how to like help other people process their own traumatic moments. And I didn't know what to expect. What I definitely did not expect was that it would have this like profound impact on me and my own understanding of my narratives and where this stuff comes from. And so the course runs over 14 weeks, and it's broken into three like phases or three big chunks. And so the first part, the first class, the whole thing over the course of, a couple of months is like this journaling approach where you basically, they call it kintsugi, which is named after the Japanese art of kind of repairing ceramics with gold.
Yeah.
And so this idea that like in our culture, we try to fix things so that it looks like it never broke in the first place, right? We'd use our clear super glue and try to make it perfect again. Erase it. Whereas they're really, that kintsugi is about honoring the cracks and recognizing that they make us unique and beautiful. And I just loved everything about that. And so you basically would take a moment in your day where you responded to something in a way you weren't maybe proud of, and then you journal about it. And you journal from the perspective of your judge, like your inner judge, and your victim, so your like inner child voice. You just go back and forth. And so an example might be, I'm mad, or I like yelled at my kids because we were running late for school. Okay, well, the judge is telling me, how could you yell at them? You're going to totally fuck them up. Like, this is not, you're a terrible mother. You can't do that. And then the victim is like, well, if everyone just got up when I asked them to, and if I had more help around the house where I wasn't doing all the things and, and you just go back and forth, and you kind of like really forces you to drill way down into that moment and understand like what's really behind it. Whereas for me, what's really behind it is I don't actually care if they're late for school. I don't want to be late to work and have my clients think that I'm not good enough at my job or I'm abandoning them, right? So it kind of starts to like uncover your deep narratives. And what you realize through the process. And then the course goes on into this is sort of more learning this sort of map around how we can access stories like around, kind of like bypass the subconscious and get down below and access these stories to create freedom from them, right? And like help release them. But it really helped me understand like, oh, not only do I have sort of these few key narratives that everything stems from around worthiness and, being worthy of love and the abandonment stuff, which also kind of really has a dotted line over to the same thing, right? Like I feel abandoned because I'm not worthy of being loved. Mm-hmm. And you start to realize that like trauma is actually just the way that you're attaching that moment to those narratives, right? Because if I didn't have trauma around it, I would just be able to let it go more easily. I don't know if you all follow Gabor Mate, mm-hmm. but I love him and his work. And he has there was this moment where he was talking to someone. He was like, if someone told you, I love your green hair, but you knew you didn't have green hair, you'd be like, oh, maybe they have maybe they're colorblind. You wouldn't think anything of it. But if you like thought, or maybe it's not even if I like your green hair, but more like, why did you dye your hair? Why is your hair green? Like that doesn't look good. Like some comment about that you knew wasn't true. It would roll off your back. But if you kind of believed it, then you might start to internalize that and feel yucky about it.
Or if you really, really wanted green hair and you could never have it, or
sure.
you had green hair and you were bullied for it.
Mm-hmm.
All the stories mm-hmm. that can come and create trauma. Like the trauma exposure creates the stories about yourself.
Totally. And so once it's like, I think of it almost as this big puzzle, and I love puzzles. And so it's like a puzzle of like human emotion, kind of, where you can kind of start to see those, exactly what you're doing here in this session, right? To be like, oh, I'm seeing what your daughter needed from you is what you actually needed from other people. And it's just, it's all about the stories and the conditioning. Once you can also recognize many of these things are stemming from the same place, and that it's not your fault and it's not something that needs to be fixed. It's just one element of many that comprise, you, it helps a lot, I think, for people to kind of zoom out and see this bigger. It's like you're zooming into this moment to help you zoom out and realize, oh, okay, like this is in part a byproduct of the society I've been raised in, my upbringing, like all these different elements.
Uncovering the awareness and sort of taking the fault of each little thing off of you as much as possible, little by little, I guess.
Totally. But so that class, really, to answer your original question, it's like, it really just changed my life and taught me how to start recognizing that, because before taking it, I would have identified as being a control freak and a type A, perfectionist, all these things, but I didn't have the language or the understanding to really go much deeper than that, or to know how to actually like move through that. I don't even want to say fix it, because I just don't like that language of like that we were broken or something's wrong with us. But just how to create new tools so that I can live a life of more peace and confidence and,
I resonate with that, because it's sort of like you could spend years trying to like fix part of you and feel like you're failing because you haven't fixed it. And the reality is like doing the work and uncovering parts of yourself and like renaming fault and things like that. Because all of this takes so many years, it feels better than like, oh, I haven't fixed that yet.
Totally. Well, and even when I think back to like how I was trying to approach Kaya as a baby, and I was trying to fix her all the time. I was trying to use my problem solving tools, and I'm trying to research in the middle of the night all the things that could or could not be wrong with her, like trying to understand so that I could ultimately fix whatever was going on. And had I kind of known or gone into it under the framework that like, it just is, she doesn't need to be fixed, like barring any medical things or allergies or something that's causing her like physical discomfort, like people just are who they are, and we have to like allow them the space to be all of those different aspects of this huge spectrum, right, of who they are. And that's what loving someone unconditionally is. But it's hard because we don't know, we're not always privy to seeing the full spectrum of anybody, because people don't share that. They don't share those parts.
Because we've been conditioned not to.
Totally.
Because if you are struggling, having a hard time, there's something wrong with you, or there's something like you're not good enough. Yeah.
Totally. It's just all
so toxic.
Totally. It just perpetuates itself forever and ever until,
Yeah.
we die.
Yeah.
It's like, wow.
Well, what do you feel like the perfectionism was ever like? It starts off as a protective mechanism at some point, like to get you to do the things so that you get the love that you need to feel good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And until you have awareness that you don't need that protection anymore, and then you can release that.
Yeah.
Do you think that the traumatic birth that you had, was there any other way to understand that on a core level?
So part of the birth story medicine process entails going through your own birth story healing session. And so when I did it, it was really profound how she kind of got me again, like kind of bypassed my subconscious and got way down under. And what I realized is that the narrative that I was attaching, at least to that specific moment we were working with, was around being too much. And that I was like, my emotions were too much. And I was just, nobody knew what to do with that. Right. And that was actually the story I was fixing, that moment too. And what we realized through the processing session, what I realized is that actually it wasn't too much. Like what it was doing was stretching my edges and my capacity of being a feeler, like a hugely emotional person. It was like pulling those edges out even further and pushing me to like new depths of the human experience that then will allow me to relate to and help other people more effectively and more deeply, right? And be in that understanding what that's like, where, it's almost like being an explorer of your own inner world. And so it's like going to the depth of the ocean or something where like all of a sudden there's like these fucking light up fish and things you've never even heard of and seen. Well, you wouldn't know how to speak to that to someone else if you hadn't been there and seen it. But then, you get in a situation where you talk to someone else who's also been to the bottom of the sea, and then you can share in that understanding of those light up fish or whatever that is. So it's, that's kind of how I was able to reframe it in my mind, is like, it was actually this beautiful, not comfortable. It was very uncomfortable, but this transformative moment wherein I was able to expand vastly, like, and just recognizing the vastness of all of it. And that we have the capacity to be as vast as we want to be, which is scary sometimes, and also very empowering and exciting.
Yeah. Your first birth, you were really focused on like trying to consume everything you possibly could so that you could control it, right?
Yeah.
And then the second one, like, what did you let go of, or how did you approach it differently?
Oh man, I didn't even talk to that. It was a totally different experience. I didn't have, I did nothing with regard to preparing. I didn't listen to any podcast.
You did the opposite.
Literally the opposite. Like, I didn't know sometimes, like the first time around, I feel like many people, birthing people, could relate to this. You could tell someone exactly the month, day, I'm 41.2 week. Like it's so precise, and you know what size fruit your baby is, and you know all the things. And like the second time around, I did none of it because I'd already learned a lot of it. And I was just much more, first off, I didn't have the ability because we were trying to move and I was working and I had this toddler. Like I didn't have the like mental space or the time to do that.
Which is important also for people to know, right? Like you're in the first pregnancy, you're tracking on an app and,
Right.
and doing all these. You just don't have time anymore to do that.
You don't. And and some people might still want to, but I understood the process at that point. So I didn't feel the need to like learn all about it anymore. And then, it just flew by. It absolutely flew by, where I was like, oh my gosh, how is this? I felt like I needed more time to like, just get ourselves ready for this baby. It was all just a lot more letting go of, and just letting the process go as it will. Another thing I didn't speak to when I was like telling the story the first time around was how difficult feeding was for me. And I think that's a really important thing to call out, that feeding a child from your body can be one of the most stressful, challenging things you'll ever go through. I think it's more rare to have a smooth transition into feeding than it is to have a very steep learning curve. And I had a very steep learning curve. And that was another moment where I had decided I wanted to feed my child from my breast, and I did not want formula, and I just couldn't. Like, she wasn't gaining enough weight. I tried all the things for like 2 months. I just almost killed myself trying to like figure out how to like make this work, and trying these different techniques and this and this and this, and getting like all this feedback from different people telling me to do different things. And it's like, it's not even mind numbing. It's like your mind just like explodes. It just can't handle all of it.
Yeah.
I remember I had a lactation consultant come to my house, and at that time I was like eating just like plain chicken and plain rice and like this elimination diet, trying to figure out if something I was eating was causing her to be gassy. Like I was just trying again to problem solve my way out of it. And she just let go of all of that. She's like, or she helped me let go of all of it. She's like, I just want you to like eat whatever you want. You are not causing this. You don't have to, it's just, she kind of just gave me permission to like stop all the things I was doing. And then we did some formula, and I realized I can like combo feed this baby, and it's absolutely fine. And it was actually less stressful for me because then it wasn't all on me. Like my husband could feed her, and I didn't have to have those like horrible morbid thoughts that like, if I get hit by a car, she'll be fed. It was like, it was just actually ended up being so positive, even though I've resisted it so hard.
What were some of the stories that you told yourself about feeding your child before you were feeding your child?
I think I like, it's just these stories around it's so natural, and it's this like beautiful bonding experience. And and the breast milk is so incredible, and just the science behind it is amazing. And, just, I knew it could be challenging, but I didn't know how. I just did not expect it to be as hard as it was. And I think some of the stories were just around like, well, my breasts aren't working right, or like my body isn't doing what it's supposed to. I always had a really low supply no matter what I ate or drank or did. And yeah, so you just feel like a failure in that regard too. Like you're doing something wrong, and it's so primitive. It truly is one of the only like matters of life and death that you're dealing with usually. And so, yeah, I really struggled with that the first time around. And then the second time with Malia, we started into the same path where she seemed like she had a much better latch, but we found out she really wasn't transferring any milk. And so I just was like, cool, we're going to do some formula, and I'm going to pump. And that's what I'm not going to sit here and try to kill myself trying to get her to figure out how to latch, and seeing, occupational therapists to do like tongue, like we're just not, I don't have it in me to do all this. And being able to recognize that in the moment and make a different plan was really good. Like I felt like that was me learning from my experience.
You met yourself where you were at with acceptance and grace and compassion. It's okay.
And there's so many options.
And I still, it found its way into this thinking still like, cool, well, you have to pump for 6 months. And it's like, because then the baby will get food, like all these weird fake rules that aren't real, that I would like apply to myself and be like, okay, you've got to get to 6 months. And I would just like, literally the day that she turned 6 months, I had like weaned myself down where I was doing like she was getting like a little milk a day, but I felt like that was better than nothing because she was getting antibodies and whatever else. At the time, it was like the measles outbreak. It was before COVID, but, there was this like big weird measles outbreak happening. I was just like paranoid and scared. I just wanted her to have antibodies. And it's just so interesting the way that anxiety can manifest in all these different ways.
Latches on
to whatever it can. Right. And so in this case, it was like, that was a story. I was like, okay, she needs to have it till 6 months. But then the day she turned 6 months, it may as well have been like an Office Space story where I was just going to like bludgeon the shit out of that pump. I was so over it. It was horrible. I was so done being like tied to the wall, and like it felt so unnatural. It's like here I am bottle feeding my baby while I'm pumping. I couldn't even hold her. She'd have to be in this like pillow while I fed her from a bottle and pumped, and the wires. And now it's come a long way with all the wireless stuff, and it's a much, much better experience for people, I think. But still, it was just one of those where like I was doing something I didn't really want to be doing, but I felt like I needed to be a good mother.
Put those parameters on yourself.
That's the story, that if you don't do this and follow this rigid thing, then I'm a bad mother. And that's like crushing.
And that's a key narrative that like comes up all the time. It's like this fear of not being good enough in general, and specifically not being a good enough mother.
There's another fragile little being attached to you then.
So much pressure.
It's not just
parents.
But yeah, I think feeding stuff is important for people just to,
Yeah.
I just wish we could shift the expectation to one where it can be a very steep learning curve. I like to encourage my clients to like book in, between 3 and 5 sessions with a lactation consultant straight off the bat, because you're going to need at least a few. And that way you don't feel like a failure if you're having to have them come back again, or you're having to meet with them another time. It's like, no, this is like, you're going to need many meetings with them. And that's normal because you've never done this before.
Having realistic expectations.
Totally.
It can change everything.
Yeah.
But as a perfectionist, you can't have realistic expectations.
Right. I know.
You have perfect expectations.
Well, at the end of every episode, we ask 2 questions, two of the same questions to all our guests. The first one is, what advice would you give to someone who's about to give birth?
I think my advice is probably twofold. One, my first advice would be to just whatever they can do to deeply believe that they are worthy of support and care themselves, and to try and line that up for themselves however they can. If they have the resources to hire support like a doula, amazing. That's not everyone, but even if it's like having neighbors who are there to check on you, or
Meal train.
anything, any way that you can receive support yourself. I just think it's critical. And again, because so much emphasis is put on the birth, like I really just like to try and shift that into like, let's make sure you have a plan for that first 3 months after at least. And then second would be just to invite people or encourage them to not be afraid to explore their own inner world as well, because I think birth is one of the very few extremely powerful, almost a portal, like a very powerful moment in your life where you transform. And it's really cool to see, to like let yourself go through that process and to see what you become on the other side, but just staying open to that and just reminding, for me, it's like, I'm always just trying to remind myself. I had this mantra that I would say to myself during the pandemic. I got caterpillars for my daughters that like you watch them become butterflies. And it was disgusting. It was like the most foul process. It just, these little canister they were in just got so disgusting. It was like gross. And then, you're watching, I had the privilege of standing right there on the kitchen counter, right by them when they happened. I got to watch 2 of them emerge and I started crying. I was like, this is incredible. But I just kept saying to myself, transformation is messy business. Like that was my kind of mantra. And it's like anything beautiful comes from a dark place. If you think of flowers and they're in their seed and they're under the ground and they have to like, all that energy builds up and they burst forth and they become this gorgeous flower. And the same with butterflies and the same with birds and all these amazing things that have transformed. Right. And I think it's just recognizing and like giving yourself grace when you're in the dark, confusing parts, because that's part that you have to have that part as well.
You have to go through it. There's no other way.
Yeah. But just being connected to all these other things that are so incredible in the world, like you can remind yourself there's so much beauty and, like magnificence on the other side if you can just kind of go through the process.
Did you know that at the time when you were in the darkest depths, though?
No way. 0%.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And I think if someone had maybe planted that seed for me or said that, it might have helped just to be like, oh, right, this is that dark place.
Yeah.
Just to kind of give you, it's like helping you navigate, like grounding you into your surroundings. You're like, okay, yeah, I know I'm in the dark place. That's fine. They told me about this. Like, I think even that little bit of, I don't know, like acknowledgement or would go a long way for people.
Well, it can quiet like 1,000 what ifs.
Totally.
You can refocus on like getting through rather than like trying to worry about what's coming next.
Yes. Yes.
So we have one final question. What is something that makes you laugh about your birth experience or just being a parent in general?
Can you tell I'm like was in this very serious exploration of what makes me laugh about it? I mean, being a parent, it's hysterical. I think it's like very funny. All the like weird things your kids do and that your body does. And like, it's just wild. With regard to the actual birth, I think one thing that was funny is we like brought a bottle of champagne. We thought we were going to celebrate. And like, that's the last thing I wanted. And then they like in Australia would give you an option to have champagne with your dinner. Like you could like pick whatever things you wanted off this list. And so we ended up, and I was like, I don't even want to eat anything. I just want some soup. Like, but we had all these like little champagne bottles that we ended up taking home with us, and they sat in our fridge for like the next like year or something. It was just like this weird moment of, I think in part because it's like old me. It was just like this tiny symbol of like old me who wasn't there anymore. You know, like old me would have been like, yes, let's have a glass of champagne to celebrate. And that version of me was like, that's not what I need. Mm-hmm. I don't want that at all. Like, not to say I had champagne last night, but like, it was just this funny, like, moment where you expect one thing and then the reality was just so different. And I could just symbolize that down into this small little like mini champagne bottle.
Mm-hmm. Do you still have it, the bottle laying around somewhere?
No, because we moved. We might have if we hadn't moved. You kind of like, you don't actually want to drink it down the road because it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Champagne.
Yeah.
So
Well,
just
the symbolism behind it, what it means to you.
That memory though.
The memory. Yeah.
Totally. And I do love like attaching things into a symbol. And it's like it was kind of, it just made me laugh. It's like, cool. Well, now we have all these like cheap champagne that we're never going to drink.
That's so funny. Well, thank you so much for sharing your birth stories. I feel like you brought such a unique perspective to the podcast with living in 2 different countries and even just the difference between 2 births. I really enjoyed hearing your story, and I feel like we could talk forever. I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into birth story processing with you next, and we'll get into it here in a bit.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Bearing Birth is available on all major podcast streaming services. We invite you to subscribe as well as follow us on Instagram at Bearing Birth Podcast.